Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. In this episode, we continue to celebrate the National Marine Sanctuaries' 50th year of ocean conservation and stewardship. Our guest today is Dr. Leila Hatch. Leila is a research ecologist at the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries Science and Heritage Division. She coordinates NOAA's efforts to monitor underwater sound across the sanctuary system and apply that information to protect these special places and to make them better. Leila, it is a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, and so glad you're willing to kind of step in, lean in to participate in this podcast and part of this 50th year of celebrating the National Marine Sanctuaries.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Fantastic. Now, what I love to do with any guest for that matter, but really I'm finding it incredibly fascinating to hear about everybody's path to how they first got into their profession and eventually made their way to the National Marine Sanctuaries. And it just would love if you could give us a kind of a 30,000 foot view of who is Dr. Leila Hatch.
Absolutely. They are fun paths. And mine is kind of born of parents who are really interested in social activism and who were also very interested in music. And really, actually, the apple then doesn't fall very far from those two trees. But I grew up in upstate New York near Cornell University. And when I was growing up, the university was starting a place called the Bioacoustics Research Program within the Laboratory of Ornithology. And my father, who was a musicologist and studied the role of music in people's lives around the world, was really involved in some of the hiring they were doing to start that place. And the new director moved in next door. And we lived in a very rural environment where I had been very, very close to nature. And my mom was really interested in legal protections for people in the family court system. So she was really engaged in civil rights and activism and representing people who were underrepresented in systems. And those things really were kind of guiding to, as that place got started up and started to think about how to use the sounds that they were recording underwater, as well as the sounds they were recording from birds, to better protect animals. And I got really interested in that through high school. And then I went away to college, and in college was really interested in, well, still singing and music, because they are still really important to me and to things I love, but also to studying biology and thinking about how we can use information in sciences for protection. And I did my work there on whales and became really interested in genetics. And then after that, I worked in different places around the world where field work was needed for big projects about how people affect the environment, from Australia to Madagascar to different projects off Hawaii. And often the theme was understanding whether we could, how animals were responding to something we were doing, figuring out how we could observe those changes when they occurred, and then helping policymakers make decisions. And by the end of my degree at Cornell, where I worked on questions about how to manage large whale species all around the world, and got to go to the International Whaling Commission's meetings where different countries thought about those questions and things like that, I was really sure that I really wanted to work in that policy landscape and continue to work on kind of technical advising. And I applied to the John A. Knaus Marine Policy Fellowship Program. and was placed in as a legislative fellow in the House of Representatives for the Resources Committee. It was a really intense year. Maybe they all are actually in Congress, but this particular one passed the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which is actually a big deal right now, even for guiding offshore wind development, renewables development. So it was a really big shift in energy policy. And we were reauthorizing the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation Act. We were reauthorizing the Marine Mammal Protection Act. There was a lot of legislative work going on. And I got really interested in that. And at the end, wanted to move to Boston to be with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and started to look at ways of working in the executive branch in that same space. And that drew me to working with Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, which is off the coast of Massachusetts, because from the minute I set foot in the door to get to meet with the research lead in Stellwagen, I could see that this was a place where science and decision making, for good and for not for good and for evil, but for for all the good and bad reasons, they were really being done by people working very closely together. It was a small team of people who really had to do that integration. So if you could do it, I call it a very short feedback loop. But there was no desire to keep the science over here and all the decisions over here, right? There was a constant need to do the science and bring it directly into what you might not need to know next to make a better protective decision. And I loved that space. And I've been with the sanctuary program ever since.
Fantastic. And as you were laying out the breadcrumbs, so to speak, from the beginning to your last sentence, I'm thinking, I was imagining someone who was constantly adding more fuel and spark to everything that they were doing, so it just became bigger and bigger and bigger in your life. I mean, it obviously starts with your parents, your neighbor, and then just interest in music and in sound, being outdoors. And I love that entire trajectory. And I think a lot of that I have also seen in other episodes we have done is that it begins when you're young, with parents who are really had a passion for outdoors, activism, environment. And I mean, I grew up in a city with concrete and sidewalks, and I would go biking down to the local baseball field, and that was my life. So I love that. And I do have to put a plug in for Cornell. Is on my smartphone here, I have an app from Cornell University called Merlin. And I was introduced to it by another individual in the outdoor spaces. She's the bird diva, Bridget Butler, up in Vermont. And as I was being introduced to this passion for birding, and even here in the desert, because we're on the flyways going 2 times a year, and just being able to see birds and hear their sounds. And that's fantastic. And when you said ornithology and sound, I'm thinking Merlin. So that was perfect. So thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate
Absolutely.
that. Now, as a research ecologist, what is I'm sure there's no day in the life. It's probably a week, a month, a year, many years in the life. But what is the role of a research psychologist at the National Marine Sanctuaries?
I think you're right that they do. There are several folks who work with that title, and we all have slightly different flavors of job. At a very high level, though, what it is that we do is integrate and inform and lead scientific projects that are highly applied in nature, that are answering questions that either the system at large or individual sites need in order to and have prioritized to better protect those places. Because I work for our headquarters, Office of Science and the Science and Heritage Division, I hold an interest in all the questions that each place around the sanctuary, each special place needs and is interested in. But I also am very interested in how our entire system can be best informed and have the best information services to make decisions. And how do we take data all the way from its collection underwater to stakeholders who are really interested in how these places are, how they're being protected, but also how they can use them. So I think everyone has a certain blend in there. I have a piece of my portfolio that is directly about advising policy decision making, because underwater sound touches quite a few decision making spaces, in not just in sanctuaries, but in a lot of underwater environments.
As I was preparing for today's episode, Leila, I will go out and I'll look for an image that I can use for my background. And of course, to our listeners, if you go out to the YouTube page, you're going to see about 7 to 10 minutes of Leila and I having a conversation, my background. I have to admit, it did not dawn on me the competing nature of sound in the ocean and what is being produced, and also its effect, either known or unknown, and the impact that it has on the conservation of species who depend on sound to navigate to where their kids are, the little baby whales and other fish, and or to navigate into different kinds of waters maybe as they're navigating. And how does one begin to gather this information and to then decide what's important, what should we be researching and moving forward with in terms of like a policy decision or an awareness type of campaign? I know that's a big question, and we could probably spend a lot of time on. Half the battle with these podcasts is I tend to want to go above my pay grade, so to speak, but I'm just curious because this map includes weather, boats, and different animals. And how do you gather all this data up and then decide what are the initiatives we should be working on?
Yeah, actually, it was a really good question. And it was one that we have really wrestled with. So I think actually we like to turn that question around, which is we like to ask, what do we need to know? And then work our way back to what are the data collection services? And I know that's almost semantic, right? It's cart, horse, cart, but
Right.
it actually is really important, because all data collection underwater takes a lot of resources, right? And we need to be a nimble program. We need to be a program that is really, like I said before, in this short feedback loop where we're trying to collect information, steward it in some really important ways so that it is the most usable and the most dynamic that it can be, because that's what our oceans are now. Is they're very absolutely not static environments. So what we did is we did go around the country and ask the questions about where we need to be gathering this information. And the information is responsive to lots of different types of questions. In the Florida Keys, it can be responsive to fishery management questions. Are we placing some of our reserve areas or are the reserve areas where they exist, protecting spawning aggregations of fish who, when they spawn, make sound? So we are able to track some of the inside and outside behavior of spawning aggregations. Florida Keys is just an example. We do this in several places. So that's a fisheries management construct where people will continue to deliberate about it. How can we fish in the most sustainable ways and protect stocks and their longevity, but also have really vibrant recreational and commercial fisheries? Then there are questions like you highlighted around noise impacts. We are doing something offshore. Sometimes its noise production is incidental, meaning we're actually just moving t-shirts from China to the United States. That's our goal. But as a side product, we're producing a lot of underwater noise. okay, well, who's bothered by that? That is driving the background noise levels in several of our sanctuaries where shipping lanes are, especially those transited by shipping lanes, higher. That's a background din that makes it harder for them to communicate. So the doing end of those things is to collect data in places where animals and shipping are overlapping, understand the changes that are taking place in that background environment, understand their dynamics and how that ebb and flow with economic indicators and other things, so that we can design mitigation approaches, whether they're routing or operational or design and quieting initiatives that might help. And just to give you like one more flavor, we have enforcement and surveillance interests in some other places as well, where we are able to use acoustics as a remote sensing capability to help us understand how compliant folks are with areas that they've been asked to avoid or that they are mandated to avoid. And we can hear activity in those areas, and we can work with law enforcement to consider next steps. So those are just 3 flavors, just to give a sense of where we put where we put our data collection focus and how diverse the applications can be. But one thing that's become really important is the centralization and data management parts, which is getting all the information collected in comparable ways, documenting it, and making it available to the public in an archive. And that has been a really big push in the last 4 years, so that you can now go to our NOAA data center and download all of the sound that we record, as well as examples of the types of things we hear in sanctuaries.
I think that is absolutely fascinating. And as you were describing these 3 scenarios, I was imagining all this data that is being collected. And I think if there's any advantage or positive outcome of all the data we collect and the mining of it and the presenting of it, you can create models over the course of days, weeks, months, years of, I would imagine, migration patterns. I'm thinking the whale migration in the Pacific. Where are the whales during different types of the season? And where are the shipping lanes, as you were talking about the t-shirt coming from China to the US? Is maybe the route they take is different in the fall time frame versus the summer time frame because of that migration that's taking place. I don't know if I've gone above my pay grade, but I was just imagining some of that.
Yep, absolutely. And it's not as fun. The applications are all really dynamic, and sometimes folks are frustrated when what I want to talk about all the time is metadata reports and how important they are. But the underbelly of making all of that information usable, and just like you said, mining it not just for the information we need today, but stewarding it so that the question I want to ask of it and that somebody else wants to ask of it in 10 years is completely askable, right? That
Yeah.
these are absolutely accessible to the person who has another idea. And that's how it should be. These are federally funded data sets, and our taxpayer dollars should be going to them being available for all of those uses.
I'm also curious, given the nature of our environment and the warming of the oceans and the warming over the land, and there's this emphasis, like I live in Southern Nevada in Las Vegas right now. My frame of reference is every house should have a solar panel array to draw electricity from the sun. Okay. And I know another area of producing alternative energies is the wind farms out in the ocean. And I'm curious whether, and this gets back to like the diagram that on my Zoom background, is unanticipated consequences, or perhaps maybe somebody did ask the question or realize we have to study this, but the impact of like the wind farms. And because I would imagine as those big blades are twirling around, one, it's a danger for the birds and their migrations, but I would imagine that also produces sound that makes its way in the water and could potentially impact the animals underwater because of the sounds from the wind farm. What are, again, I'm going above my pay grade, but I'm just thinking about that. I wonder if that's a factor.
Oh, absolutely. This is something that gets a lot of attention and a lot of work by many federal agencies, as well as a lot of other partners, including wind development companies. So yes, this is a very active space. I like to start, though, from the place of, yes, we have to understand how noise from first a very heightened noise period that or can be heightened of pile driving in order to install a wind farm. We need to understand for sure how we can best do that to reduce the influence of noise on marine species, and that's an area of a lot of active work. There is some work also on the operational space, and there's definitely much lesser effects in terms of acute impacts to animals, injurious impacts from high intensity noise during the operational phase. It's more a question of you've changed the kind of, is there a subtle change in ecosystem dynamics that is part of a small shift in background noise levels, and there are so many other contributing factors to things that have changed subtly in within larger scale wind farms. That's some of the information that we can pull from the Europeans being ahead of us in this space. But just for a moment, with all of that interest that I have, I think the other card we have to keep on the table is that if we don't develop this ability to change our trajectory in terms of greenhouse gases, then it is the right whale and it is the bottom dwelling fish that are very low frequency centric and are affected by noise. It is many of these species who are as threatened as we are. So it's absolutely not that means that we don't care about the environmental consequence of developing renewable energies. We absolutely do, but we need to remember that it's not an either or. It's a much more complicated interrelationship of humans being among the constellation of all life on Earth that depends on our ability to find new ways and to reduce our energy needs, first of all, and keep working on the reduction and the efficiency space, but also come up with alternative energies that will not continue to result in really rapid warming, which changes where the prey species are for whales, which changes how far they have to search and how efficient they are and whether they're able to make a living in the ocean.
Sure, sure. When you were describing the examples of the initiatives that are underway as a result of this research into sound, can you circle back if you can and add some more detail to maybe an example or two where there were some really good decisions where, because again, you're on the policy side back in the home office, and I'm sure there's a lot of competing perspectives, and there's the big P word, the politics, but good decisions are being made. But are there some decisions that were like, we did good work here. We all came together and we came away from this better than when we started?
Sure. There are, and you're right that what I bring to the table are some of the hows and the recommendations from the science and technical side. I truly am not a policymaker. I'm an advisor to policymakers, and it is an important distinction for all of the reasons that you kind of hint at. However, a good example might be in Massachusetts Bay, close to where I am right now, off the coast of Boston. There was an interest in installing 2 offshore liquefied natural gas import terminals. And these were places where instead of having onshore terminals where tankers would come and deliver liquefied natural gas, that these terminals would be built offshore and tankers would come to them and deposit their gas directly into a pipeline offshore, which would, then be transported onshore and into people's homes for winter heating in the Northeast. And there was a lot of interest in installing these, but a lot of really hard work to consider how to do that in a way that would protect fisheries interests and would protect right whales, and particularly with the increase in both noise and vessel traffic that was going to be part of the picture. And we recommended some pretty important monitoring provisions, but also a direct mitigation system where a series of 10 listening buoys would be placed in the shipping lanes leading up to the terminals. And they would be constantly listening and able to transmit their information in real time. And the LNG tankers would be responsible then for slowing down if they heard a right whale. And that system's been in place since 2007.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So, I mean, that's a lot of science, but then a lot of nitty-gritty policy decisions about how to make it work, and a lot of partnership with other federal agencies and with the companies themselves to make it happen.
That brings up another question, is this idea of collaboration and partnership, especially with the business who, they have, either they own the ship or they lease it. They've got the product. They want to, they load it, they ship it, they offload it, and it's their margins. I'm sure they're making a decent amount of money, but they've got tight margins, tight timelines. And how open and participative are they when it comes? And I don't mean to be, I'm not trying to set you up here, Leila, but
No.
are they really? I mean, these are true partners in coming up with the best possible solution to this challenge, as opposed to you thinking about, you have the science, the data, you've got the government side of the house, but just the commercial side. I'm curious as how participative they are in wanting to make the best possible decision and outcome.
Yeah. I think what I like about you asking the question from the category of what can companies do and how do they see their landscape for what's possible for them, and when are they looking to lean in and find partnerships, they do that sometimes because they get really interested in specifically noise over here in this place, right? And sometimes it really just is at the level of, you can really enhance their participation if you can really focus on the many ways that they can be more environmentally, they can reduce their environmental impact. So I guess what I would say, so I work on noise, right? I work on underwater noise impacts. And there are places around the country where we have programs that there are particular vessel operating companies, and they're engaged sometimes because they're being pushed to the table because there's really heightened concern locally about noise impacts and southern resident killer whales around the ports of Seattle and Vancouver, or blue whales off the coast of California and in some of our sanctuaries, or North Atlantic right whales in the Northeast, right? There are places and species where we're really worried about populations that are being impacted by vessels. And you may, because of those pressures that do come from the public and come from advocates, we develop more sort of voluntary participatory programs that really do demand that companies come forward and come to the table. And sometimes there's small incentives to keep them there. But a lot of the time it's to show them what kind of information resources we can give them that help them quantify what would I need to do and how much will it cost me to have a really strong environmental effect. And the more we can do to add up the noise benefits, the reduced collision risk, the GHG reduction, some of these things can all go together in one decision that a company could make, for example, to slow down in an area. Sure. So when those things can all line up, it can be a much more powerful message than one constituency battling on noise and the other one battling on collision and the other one over here working on fuel economy and GHG, right? So in the vessel space particularly, the more we can understand that alignment and the more we can provide those services to companies so that that's what's on their table. I think it'll really help continue to grow what right now is some companies who are engaged more locally in some of our programs that are voluntary or incentivized. And in other places, we have mandatory speed rules that not the sanctuary program, but that NOAA as an agency has in place that mandate that vessels reduce their speeds in some places, for example. So that's less about do companies come to the table and more about assessing the compliance.
Sure. And I would imagine the companies that are coming to the table are being compliant. That adds to their brand, that the public sees, their goodwill that the public sees. And it's not just monetary, but it makes good public perception sense, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think there is definitely work to be done to continue to attach some of this to the consumer space, because you're right, that's in the United States, we don't own or build a lot of ships. Some of our biggest forcing mechanisms on green shipping are through being the customers.
Sure.
So it would be great for us to start to kind of, and there are programs that exist like this, but to start to bring some of these, for example, whale protective programs into the consumer space is definitely something that folks are working on.
That's a perfect segue to a question about, since this is the Outdoor Adventure Series, my listeners are folks who are very interested and passionate about outdoor activity. And in the case of the National Marine Sanctuaries, everything from boating to kayaking to scuba diving, snorkeling to fishing. And what are some of the initiatives that you and your team have worked on across the sanctuaries where it's not just about the noise that people make, but there's other things, initiatives that have been underway to we as the consumers of the park system can help protect animals and their habitats?
Do you mean how can citizens engage in the projects? Is that what you
Or
mean?
what are some of those projects that have been underway where it's the citizens, the people using the sanctuaries, and how has some of your work informed what they should do or should not do when they come to the park system and enjoy the resources that are available?
Yeah. I think in sanctuary programs, I may actually, Howard, just identify I'm not the perfect person to speak to all of these. You'll have
Okay.
other interviewees, I think, who might do that. But I know that there are sanctuary wide, but then in individual sanctuaries, there are lots of sort of public awareness and engagement projects that you almost always tie in some of our kind of research work into the picture. There are sea a spout projects and sanctuary watch projects and boat and sort of recreational education programs about safe boating around whales programs, for example, all of which in some vein have to answer questions around like, well, what is the best way to operate around animals, right? And that usually does at some kernel come from information collection, from data collection. How far away do animals get disturbed by this? So what's a good buffer or a good suggestion for what my distance should be from animals to be a good ecotourist? Some of those questions get answered and shared as lessons across the program. There's obviously lots of citizen science data collection work that is done with the public being active data collectors, both in coral reef spaces and in our shoreline spaces, the places where we manage all the way up to the beach, right? Where things like marine litter, collection about what we're finding on the beach and all of that is very much done hand in hand with the public and with volunteers. So it really does kind of run the gamut.
Okay. Okay. I'm curious, with your work at the sanctuaries, occasionally you get to go out of the office and pay some visits. I'm sure you're totally up for that anytime. What has been some of the special places where you've gone to visit and seen the work that they're doing and come back and say, God, we are really making an impact here?
Hmm. I can honestly say that every sanctuary I visit, and you're right that the visits are profound in that you go beyond the, oh, I knew you were doing that, to the understanding of the dedication of the people involved, right? And the beauty of the place, just the absolute beauty of the place. So those are, I mean, I have a lot of my own experiences that, for the years I spent working at Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary specifically, but I haven't yet had the opportunity to go to all of our sanctuaries. And I hope that happens, because every time it does, I again have that moment of going, oh yeah, this is really special
Okay.
and really diverse.
Good answer. Good answer. So, if I'm correct, and as I was doing the research, some of the larger projects, and this is a part of the aha moment, which we typically do towards the end of our episodes, is one of the projects you were involved with, or the sanctuary was involved with, was part of some Emmy-winning films.
Actually, that was not a sanctuary specific
Okay.
project. That was a
Okay.
team of folks led by the Natural Resources Defense Council, actually.
Yeah.
And I was just a member of a very diverse team of folks who were in Sonic Sea, which is a movie about underwater sound and the effects of noise on marine life.
Okay. Okay. And what's it like when you meet younger, I don't know, could be graduate students, undergraduate students, young kids in high schools, or what's it like meeting them and really helping to kind of feed their interest, because they're the ones that are going to be following you into this profession? What's it like working with, again, the graduates down to the younger kids who are just beginning to explore science, citizen science, stewardship, environment?
Yeah, it's the most inspiring by far. The aha moments almost all come from there. I'm repeatedly struck by it, right? Because there are a lot of reasons that I need to work on things that are highly visible, like a movie or a big media project, or things that get the word out to the most people as efficiently as possible, in hopes that we can keep bringing more voices into the tent, right?
Mhm.
However, what keeps me going is to see that the spirit and intent and interests of people who reach out to want to get involved in this type of work, who are now much younger than me. When I was that age, it was harder to consolidate. And these folks often already kind of have a mini team. They sometimes have a mini team in their elementary school or their middle school, or definitely their high school. They've often participated in environmental awareness marches and change climate change activism, and before they're out of primary education. So that I find hopeful, and I am inspired by it, and it makes me feel change relative to when I was that age. And then the undergraduates, I think also their ability to define what they are training themselves for as very applied careers, I also think is different than what it was when I was at that stage in my education. And I'm hopeful that they are finding more interest in interdisciplinary work, less pressure on them to kind of stay in more theoretical zones, and more kind of interest in them kind of attaching their idealism to their training.
Okay. Okay. As you take a minute to maybe think about your career and the work that you have accomplished and your achievements along the way, is there anything different that you would do, or maybe a little bit of a course shift, or has this been the right course for you?
Hmm.
Little profound question. Sorry about that one.
It is profound. It's good. I think I'm a mid-career person. And so to some degree, I think I ask myself that every day now in a way that I didn't 10 years ago, and that maybe I won't in 10 years. Right now, I think I do have quite a few questions about what are the best ways when you understand both where you've been, what you've tried so far, right? And the opportunities that you've been able to take advantage of so far, but also that you have limited time, right? That's the mid-career
Yeah.
place. And I think all I can say is that I think I'll be wrestling with that over the next couple of years. And I'm extremely hopeful that some of the ways that the landscape for environmental work in the United States is changing and will continue to have energy. And that will affect some of what it feels like about where to work to be the most effective that you can be. Where
Sure, sure. So I don't think I've asked this question to any of your peers, but I'm going to ask you, Leila. I know you can handle this, and it's a little bit of a gotcha question. So if you're okay with that, do you have hope?
Hmm. Yes, I do. My hope is I think it honestly is returning. I think I've maybe like a lot of people over the last few dark years have been definitely watching hope be on a roller coaster. And again, I think we're trying to find our footing, and I think finding some momentum and feeling a sense that there are more people with more diverse backgrounds. The tent is getting bigger to work on these problems together so that we really are working on them with a whole. In any one day, there's a moment that makes it feel glass half full versus a little more glass half empty. But I'm at least feeling like the roller coaster is doing slightly smaller dips and troughs
Okay.
of late, and that's what I honestly call hope. I recently have decided that hope is really just endurance,
Okay.
because if you're going to do this work, the real thing you have to keep going with is your enthusiasm and your creativity and all of the things to keep you doing it as long as you can.
Well said.
It's one of those. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Very much. That's a saying that I use all the time. Before we head out, we have a segment we often ask in our episodes. It's called the aha moment, and I think we've talked about that already, which was the getting the younger generation interested and want to be involved in this type of work. Before we head out today, we have a segment in our show which we call the Insights to Go, and this is an opportunity for our guests to share or gift for our listeners something about the work that they're doing that has this profound impact and that you then would like to share with our audience. Could be a book, a quote, an experience. What would be your insight to go for our audience?
I know it is used a lot, this quote by Baba Diom. It was a Senegalese forestry engineer. I have had it in my world and in my slides often in presentations in my career, and I just keep coming back to it. And he said, in the end, we'll conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. And I've loved that quote forever, selfishly because it speaks to the kind of training that I've had and the little piece I can try to bring to the puzzle, which is to try to grow our understanding to try to do it through teaching, but then to ultimately grow people's love so that they are more able to conserve. So in one little short way, he brings things full circle.
I love that quote, and I know you're going to share the correct spelling of this individual's name. That's perfect. But what I love about this quote is it really, and you've just shared it, it brings back the importance of learning, science, education, and being open to understand, even if it's understanding something new or a new way. And because that's the only way we're going to survive. And I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that. Thank you. Now, I know we've got a number of media and resources we're going to share on the website or our show notes on our web pages. But if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
We'd love it if they'd head to the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries website, where there is a lot of information. And if you wanted to really dive into listening underwater, you could go to sanctuaries.noaa.gov/science/monitoring/sound.
Fantastic. And I was listening to this recording of underwater activity earlier, and it's like, oh, that is fascinating. I loved it. So we're definitely going to provide the backlinks to the Sanctuary's website, as well as to the page where your work is showing up. Leila, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. And I am so grateful that Vernon was open to this idea of interviewing members of the team wherever they're at about their work, and to help celebrate the sanctuary's 50th year of ocean conservation and stewardship. I'm so appreciative that you're part of that celebration with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Howard, for having me.
Very good. Listen, stay on the line. We're going to do a quick close, and then you and I can have a final chat. Okay.
Okay.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Dr. Leila Hatch. She is Research Ecologist at the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And today's episode was really about sound and the impact that it has on our ocean species, the animals that depend on sound to navigate wherever their food sources, around danger, migrations, and really just to stay healthy. And this impact that we as humans are having, and Leila had mentioned a container ship bringing t-shirts over from Asia to the US, or pounding, I don't know, whatever helps to stand up the wind farm out in the ocean, those pounding pipes into the ocean seafloor, and just the impact those things have on ocean life. And we tend to want things in our life to make our lives better, but we also have to realize the impact that it's having on the ocean species. And just the work that NOAA and Leila and her peers and other science agencies and environmentalists, et cetera, the commercial side, everybody has an interest in this. And just was wonderful to kind of get this broad picture and a couple of examples along the way of the impact that the NOAA Office of the Sanctuary Science and Heritage Division is doing to really help her not only protect the oceans and the bodies of water, but also to protect the species and to continue to make the sanctuaries available to us, the citizens. And really just a fantastic episode, and hope you enjoyed it as well. And we're going to provide the links back to the quote that Leila had shared, as well as we've got a lot of media resources for you on the work that Leila and her team are doing, as well as we're going to provide a link, of course, back to the Sanctuary's website at sanctuaries.noaa.gov, as well as to the page on their website where a lot of Leila and her team's work is showing up. It's science/monitoring/sound. And we're also going to provide a backlink to the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. So again, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's episode and join us on continuing to celebrate the National Marine Sanctuary's 50th year of ocean conservation and stewardship. Go out to our website at outdooradventureseries.com. You can also visit us on LinkedIn and Facebook on our Outdoor Adventure Series pages, or you can listen to this episode wherever you get your podcasts from. This is Howard Fox, and this is the Outdoor Adventure Series. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Take care now.